Welcome to the MSDW Podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at MSDynamicsWorld.com. My guests this time around are Jason Weidenbenner and Yogesh Kasat, two of the principals at Real Dynamics, a software advisory and consulting firm with expertise in Dynamics AX and 365, as well as BI, but also in helping companies to face particular challenges with their enterprise software. The team recently released a book on using Dynamics 365 for finance and operations, Enterprise Edition, and they have written about one of their specialty areas for us at MS Dynamics World on mergers and acquisitions. We talk about what it takes to integrate or split off a business using Dynamics AX or 365, why so many organizations still struggle with BI skills, and why you may want to consult someone other than your Microsoft partner during an AX or Dynamics 365 project. Okay, Yogesh, Jason, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
So I thought we could start.
So
I thought we could start by maybe just doing a little bit of an introduction. You guys are co-founders of Real Dynamics, and it's not certainly not typical. Microsoft VAR for sure. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the company and sort of some of the thinking behind how you guys operate. Yogesh, you want to go first?
We just celebrated our third anniversary for Real Dynamics, and as you mentioned, we have been helping our customers independently in a lot of degree where we are not playing role of a partner or replacing a partner for them, and we are providing independent advice, whether it's their project for implementing Dynamics or whether it's their mergers and acquisition, or if they are looking at getting value for their investment in the Dynamics platform. Most of our client base is here, and we do have a global team that helps us get delivered faster and also critical for delivery on M&A projects. Jason, do you want to add?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I handle the business intelligence track of various projects, and as businesses in general transition to a more data-driven culture, that becomes more and more important to have a strong BI platform and delivery mechanism at go live. Traditionally, a lot of ERP projects tend to put the reporting aspect of the transition on the back burner, and they often find that they'll get to the finish line and realize they don't have what they need in terms of business intelligence or reporting to run their business. So we take a strong stance in making sure that that is a parallel track on our projects, and that we're implementing very modern BI platforms for our clients.
All right, excellent. And yeah, we'll link back when we publish this too. I mean, your team has written several really insightful articles over the last few years on different aspects of AX, and I think some reporting and BI as well, perhaps. So certainly that expertise is there, and you're clearly using it on a lot of different kinds of projects. Yeah, I think the thing that we've most recently been talking about with you is, I think, what you've been working on a lot, which is sort of this specialization that you've picked up or developed or really been utilizing recently around M&A expertise, and it's really an interesting and kind of unique segment of, I think, the broader sort of Microsoft user base, companies that run their businesses with Dynamics, but are also facing the complexity of merging, of being split apart, some sort of combination of those conditions, right? Can you talk a little bit more about sort of how you develop that expertise and what you really are facing with clients in those types of scenarios?
Sure. We have been since we started. We have been having involved in a lot of projects where either our customer is in process of acquiring a business or in process of diversifying or carving out part of the business. And we had repeated and multiple such customers where they were trying to split the companies for taxation reasons, or were trying to acquire businesses and making sure the growth strategy and strategy for their acquisition was also supported by the backend ERP systems. And in one of our recent large acquisition, which we are part of, Kofax, they published a case study which talks about how ERP system can be critical for the entire acquisition. You have a lot of parties involved. You have critical transaction, which is dependent on success of having all the IT platforms combined. And that's where we saw we can really add value for the customers. You need somebody who can come in, tell exactly what needs to be done. With smaller team, you can't have like too many people, and you don't have time to lose in those scenarios. So that's where we have been able to add value for our customers.
Interesting. I mean, it seems like potentially a lot of sensitivities and a lot of legal obligations, perhaps. Are there any, particular ways that you and your team came about sort of landing on these kinds of projects, Jason?
So, the core team for Real Dynamics has a lot of expertise, a lot of history in these types of projects initially or individually. And so when we came together, that was one of the areas that we naturally gravitated towards from a contacts perspective, being able to folks contacting us simply by word of mouth for the individual roles that we had played in projects. So it was a natural transition for us as a company to move into those types of projects because of that prior experience.
And the recent one that you put out an announcement on, it was one that probably people in the dynamic space may be familiar with. Kofax was, and correct me if I have the details wrong here, but they were sold by Lexmark to the private equity firm Thoma Bravo, and this was, I assume, part of that transaction that you were working with them to sort of align their systems.
Yep, that's correct. So, as part of Kofax acquisition, there were multiple components, and of course, a lot of complexity due to their global footprint and the way transaction was overall set up. Our involvement started even before acquisition was announced, or even before they had chosen or finalized the new buyer. As part of Lexmark acquisition by a Chinese firm, they had to, as part of regulatory requirements, they had to carve out ES business, which is enterprise software solution business, and had to sell it to a U.S. corporation. And that's what we had started working on acquisition. And of course, it had strict timelines. And eventually, as it landed, it became acquisition for whole ES organization, which included Kofax and a few other entities. And once we were done with this acquisition, we realized part of the acquisition had to be carved out to another Thoma Bravo entity for the way Thoma Bravo wanted to run the business. And only Kofax ReadSoft stayed on Microsoft Dynamics, while and as a one entity, while our rest of the AS entities went to another entity within Tomograo Group. So there were multiple acquisitions or carve-outs within the same transaction.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you actually have to, or some of the biggest challenging goals that you're trying to accomplish in a scenario like that? Is it around data migration? Is it around and cleansing? Is it around some of the reporting requirements that come into it, or security and administration? I mean, can you talk any more about what some of the things you face are? And I guess the second side of that I'm curious about is how unique are each of these scenarios when you come into them, Jason?
Yeah, so some of the things that make these projects perhaps more challenging and different from a regular ERP implementation are certainly the aggressive deadline that's often dictated by a close date that can't easily be moved. And so you're running up against that fixed deadline. There's not room to extend like there often is on a traditional ERP project. And so that timeline becomes something that you really have to march to, and keeping the scope under control in that scenario. And then the other thing is you're really taking two separate businesses with two potentially completely different cultures and business models, and merging them together. And so that's another aspect of this type of project that's a little different from an ERP project. You've got two different business teams that you're working with, and so a lot of additional personalities to deal with. And so the stakeholder component and working with those teams effectively doubles from a traditional ERP implementation. From a reporting standpoint, one of the big things about an M&A project that's different from a traditional project is when that company is carved out from the original parent company, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to go back and retrieve that data once the project's over. Whatever data is migrated from the original company is now resides in the new company, and that's what you have to work with. So you don't have an old reporting system to lean on. You're taking that data, and the completeness in that data has to be there, but also you've got to find a way to quickly get access to that data archive and give the business a robust reporting from that archive in a very short time frame. So the only way to really do that effectively is with a very modern approach to BI. There's no time to sit down and write hundreds of reports to reflect the old system. So we take a very modern approach to BI to be successful in that area.
Can you say a little more about that in terms of the approach to BI? Like you said, I mean, very strict deadlines and rules to follow. Not always a lot of room to go back and correct things down the road after the separation is made or the merger is made. Are there sort of best practices, either tools or types of reporting methodologies that you tend to turn to deal with these situations?
Yeah, so there's certainly two aspects to making the reporting successful. One is the softer side, where you have to have real good interaction with stakeholders on both sides to make sure that you get the data that you need migrated in a way that ensures completeness and timeliness. So there's very much a soft side to ensuring that happens with the stakeholders. But beyond that, on the technology side, we're very focused on Microsoft Dynamics as our ERP technology platform. We're also fairly focused on the Microsoft BI stack. We certainly work in other platforms like MicroStrategy and Tableau and the other major vendors, but we like the Microsoft BI stack for the enterprise class platform that you can build from it. They've come a long way in the last few years, and especially with Power BI, where it stands today, you can scale with that, and you can move very quickly in terms of taking that data that's migrated and building self-service tools for the business, so that you're not they've got the flexibility they need to explore the archive data that comes over in the transition.
Interesting. One thing I just thought of in sort of thinking about these scenarios, there are industries where it seems like, I don't live in the M&A world or private equity. It seems like there's certain industries where companies are just being bought and sold fairly frequently between these owners. Are there any recommendations that you ever make, or do you get questions ever from Dynamics customers saying that we're not being sold, but there's a good possibility that someone might buy us, or down the road is our solution architecture, our enterprise architecture, our data management in good shape in case that happens? Or are there situations that you've walked into where an organization was really in trouble, perhaps because of poor hygiene or sort of poor usage of the system? Yogesh?
Yeah. So in a lot of our new implementations, we often stress enough on overall organization modeling to hypothetically prepare for, what if this part of business was to be set up? And looking at the history, let's look at last 10 years worth of history. How many companies we have bought, or how many times we have sold part of business, and think through the solution. What if we were to do something similar in future? Does our organization structure, foundation, what we are putting together is going to support that? How are we going to make sure if we were to acquire a few businesses, are we able to create new entities quickly enough? Do we have a right template, or how's the reporting portion is going to work when we do that? Or if we were to sell part of business, that becomes usually tricky because that's a little tough to define, because you may not know what part of business, if it is so well integrated, it is always going to have some additional thinking before you can do that. However, you have to start right there in the new implementation itself. While there are customers, as I mentioned earlier, where we were involved in the process, where they were looking at, just as a company, they were looking at where is our risk, where do we have exposure for the whole company. So we have a professional services business, which is 10% of overall value, while this may result into lawsuits or some kind of risk to the business, which can be nasty enough to break or cause issues for rest of the business. And that's where they were looking at, should we be looking at from risk mitigation perspective? Should we be looking at putting it differently in a different legal structure where it is where we can protect rest of the business if there was something wrong to happen? Same thing for public sector. Like if organization is dealing with public sector and you have certain things you have to take care of, while the rest of the business is not public sector, and the customer wanted to protect themselves from those scenarios. So there are different business reasons why customers wanted to do that, and then seek our advice to make sure they were prepared for similar situations.
One of the things that's really seems to be a topic of discussion, especially with people in the professional space with AX and 365, is that demand. The question of, I guess, demand or interest in 365 finance and operations versus the older versions of AX. What's your experience been in terms of companies that are, looking to either stay on older versions or or trying to get themselves up to the latest releases? Jason?
Yeah, I'll give a small answer to this, and then I'll kick it over to Yogesh. I think what we're seeing with the transition to Dynamics 365 is companies are approaching it in a different way. We see a lot of companies looking to dip their toe in the water with D365 and perhaps implement a smaller footprint of that while still maintaining other operations on their legacy system, or say AX 2012. It's a little bit different implementation paradigm that we see, especially with the kind of the expectations they have on their partner, perhaps not being as high, or not signing up for a project that is multi-year in scope. They're looking for smaller project sizes and more targeted module implementations. Yogesh?
Yep. So I would classify, just to add to what Jason mentioned, I would classify customers into two different segments here. The net new Dynamics customers, where they're starting totally new, fresh. They're definitely going with the cloud strategy and starting with smaller portions of the project. Let's take this portion live and then keep on adding. While the existing customers, most of our customer base, again, we get involved when they have certain challenges with their implementation, and a lot of them have some horror stories with their current AX 2012 implementation. And unfortunately, there are a lot of such customers.
So this would be in the midst of an implementation?
Very cautious. Right. So they did the implementation, but it did not go exactly the way they planned in terms of whether they had a lot of cost incurred versus the quality was not to the mark what they wanted to achieve. And in those scenarios, those customers are trying few smaller divisions. So for one of our customers, they wanted to start AX only for one of their new business, that is new country where they are entering the marketing. Another customer, they wanted to try a budgeting functionality just so that they can start budgeting in Dynamics 365. The new feature they wanted to implement was, okay, let's use D365, see how things work, make sure the learning curve is not really as part of the larger implementation, and internal team is up to speed on the new platform ahead of that implementation, and then try with something smaller implementation.
And I think we should probably just note also that I think in addition to sort of the M&A expertise, your firm, because you're not a reseller, you'll often work sort of side by side with a Microsoft partner on site with a client, or working at the same time with a client, sort of helping from different perspectives, or sometimes without a partner, maybe in some of those cases you talked about. Is that right?
Absolutely. So some of our customers who are matured in terms of they have been using AX for a long time, and they have good expertise in-house for running Dynamics AX platform, and they utilize us in advisory capacity for strategic projects. While some of the newer customers who are implementing Dynamics 365 are still in process of finishing their AX 2012 implementation, they have partners involved, and they look at us to be their advisor to help them during that implementation, making sure best practices are followed and design considerations are taken. place.
All right. One of the interesting things, and you touched on this, I've heard it elsewhere, but this idea that with Dynamics 365 deployments, companies do seem to be starting small, and I think that's maybe a positive of the platform itself, perhaps, that you do have that flexibility that's not as monolithic as earlier types of ERPs. Are there common ways that companies are doing that to start small, or is it really different kinds of approaches depending on their needs? Jason?
Yeah, so I think it just depends on where they're at with their current ERP platform and the needs that it's servicing versus the areas of greatest need that they have. I think that overall, our culture is now smartphones and apps, and that mindset has pervaded into the ERP industry as well, where the customer expects to have a more linear cost model as they implement. They don't necessarily believe or desire the kind of the traditional ERP model where you have a very large cost lay out up front, and then your costs can tail off some over time. Their upfront investment, their expectation is that it's going to be smaller, and then they can add to the features that they need to the software over time.
Interesting. All right. I mean, I guess the only other thing I had on my mind, as an independent firm, you've sort of got maybe a different perspective than a traditional Microsoft partner. Are there any other ways that the role of the independent players in this space are changing, given the kind of needs you're talking about that customers have today? Yogesh, any thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. So as we see more customer adopting Dynamics 365 and starting with the smaller, skinnier version of the pilot and then enhancing, they're not really looking for big consulting spend upfront. They're honest upfront, saying, "Hey, we don't really have much," and that's where they are seeing, "Oh, we need somebody. We're not looking for a large team to come in and go through large requirement gathering and then design and testing and 12 to 18-month project where they will end up spending a lot of money." Customers are looking for smaller teams to come in who can deliver on specific area. "Hey, I'm interested in doing budgeting implementation. Help us with somebody who has done budgeting on latest version and knows this in terms of product and then best practices in this area." Similarly, we are seeing ongoing need for customers are coming off. "Okay, we want to do the professional services to start with on T365. And as part of this engagement, we are looking for our internal team to participate to a large degree, and then we need some expertise to help us with the product related technical expertise." So we see a lot of long-term as well. We see a lot of growth in this area, customers going away from traditional approach of having high CapEx expenses upfront versus starting slowly on new platform, engaging resources who really know the area they are trying to implement, and then do it more themselves. Microsoft strategy also has helped customer take on a lot more areas than past because of the tools they're sharing, the tools they are building, like for data migration. For first time, there is data entities and things like that introduced in the product, which allows customers to take on those areas without having to rely on consulting partners.
All right, interesting. Before we go, I appreciate you guys taking the time to share all this, and it's always fun chatting with you. And congratulations on reaching 3 years. I'm just curious. I mean, when you started this business, has it rolled out the way you expected? Have there been any fun twists and turns along the way that come to mind?
Yeah, I'll let Yogesh field that one.
All according to plan, Yogesh?
Yeah. So, we are so far we have seen almost 30 to 40% growth in terms of customer additions year over year, and also we have seen at least a few case studies or testimonials with the customers every year. We are on track from that perspective. Of course, we are a little shy on in terms of meeting revenue targets and things like that, which are definitely secondary, but also important in the business. And we see that eventually catching up. There was some pause in between where customers were not sure whether there will be on-premise version or not on-premise version, and new platform had definitely created good excitement. At the same time, some customers were cautious, and that definitely impacted our revenue numbers. But when we look back and look at years ago versus when we started, we are definitely moving in the right direction and been growing. Great part of it has been our customers. A lot of our customers have given us repeat business, and their loyalty has definitely helped us get more customers through their connections. And the team we have, everybody has been doing the best in terms of protecting those customers.
Excellent. Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time today. I look forward to seeing what's next, and hopefully keep working with you guys as you move into your 4th, 5th year beyond.
Always fun to chat with you, Jason. Thank you.
Absolutely. And MS Dynamics World has been a true partner in this journey since we started. We have been able to share our knowledge with the community through the great platform. All we have to do is just focus on the technical part of the coming up with the content and hand it over to you, Jason, and you make it available for the community. That's definitely great partnership.
Yeah, I mean,
it has also helped us on the book.
Oh, right. Yep. The book too. Yeah. We always have a great response. I mean, our audience, whether they're a customer or, a professional working with customers, are always definitely curious people and ready to sort of absorb knowledge. And you guys have a lot of great expertise. So always happy to publish it as you're able to share it, making time in your schedules. I know you guys are always busy on assignment and moving all over the place to work with clients. So, I also appreciate you taking the time today. So thanks again.
Thanks, Jason.
Have a nice weekend.
This has been another episode of the MSDW Podcast. My thanks to Yogesh and Jason for joining me today. If you have any feedback, please be in touch. You can reach me at jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.